on this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
As of 3 years ago, more than 6 million Americans were living with Alzheimer's disease. Younger people get Alzheimer's disease too, but it's far less common. The number of people living with the disease doubles every 5 years beyond the age of 65. This number is projected to triple to 14 million people by 2060. By 2040, these costs are projected to jump to between $379 billion to more than $500 billion annually. And dementia, well, that's a whole other story because the statistics are even worse, as dementia is an umbrella term for so many other neurological pathologies such as Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, Lewy body disease, frontotemporal lobe dementia, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Join us today as we enter the maze of rabbit holes and creaky neurons, discussing the psychology of dementia with our own senior care expert, Jenny Kenderes. Coming up next.
Stay tuned following the interview for On the Couch and Off the Rocker. Our special guest's psycho-silly analysis by Art Lab's own head cabbager, Dr. Ima Freudnot.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Today on Therapy Bites Art Lab, rabbit holes and creaky neurons, the psychology of dementia, we're going to cover the downward slope of dementia, dealing with guilt, the 36-hour day and rethinking burnout, neuroscience of dementia, and best care practices for families. Think of dementia as Olympics for the whole family. There's a whole decathlon of events. You can't just do one or be good at one and win. Our guest today is kind of like a head coach in that dementia decathlon. She's a senior care CEO of Superhero Senior Living. She helps families learn, train, and tackle the life-size obstacle course of caring for loved ones with dementia. She has dedicated 25 years of her public life to healthcare. 5 years of that was to own your own company, Premier Senior Solutions. She's an enthusiastic public speaker, passionate about her clients and helping others. She's the author of Navigating the Next Chapter, her online course, and she'll tell you about the facts of later life care that others won't. Folks, welcome Jenny to the Art Lab, and we're glad to have her on the show today.
Stay in the stands at the end of the interview, T-Ballers, and witness our special guest slug a bite-sized brain ball with your name all over it, clean out of the Art Lab.
Jenny Kenderes in the Art Lab studio today. Jenny, welcome to the show. Tell us, what's your story and what drew you to this very challenging field of senior care?
Well, thank you so much. It is an honor to be here, and I'm really excited. You guys are a great group, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. I feel like I may come out of this with a Southern accent when all is said and done. So, I don't mind. It's an honor. So, yes, I've worked in healthcare for 25 years now, and senior living and hospice and really the geriatric population has always been, my go-to, what I love to do. It really fills up my cup. And 5 years ago, I started my own company because I was working in senior living and I was watching the families come through to me that were seeking out help and advice and information. And the amount of misinformation out there is incredible, or they're not getting the hand-holding that they needed from start to finish and then beyond. And I kept thinking, there's got to be a way I can do this better. And being a single mom, I was really fearful to start my company, for financial reasons. And my passion and my calling was to do this, though. And it's been absolutely incredible. And I'm so blessed to help so many families.
Well, that's amazing. A little bit of background about myself in long-term care is pretty much right out of grad school. I got a job offer to be a consultant, and I traveled around the country for, probably 10 years, coast to coast, designing dementia care units, DDCUs, mm-hmm. and supervising those. And mm-hmm. I train folks in Missouri, Arkansas, Illinois, Texas, Oklahoma, California, and I'm probably missing some other states. I've been up to Boston, and some places out east. And you're right. There's so much lack of information. If that's not an oxymoron, so much lack of information. There's also so many myths in the field about dementia. What are some of those myths in the field of dementia care that you've run into?
So many. And I love that, with your background, how you've actually opened these memory cares and, talk about myths, even from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what memory care looked like is very different than what it looks like today. Which goes hand in hand with the myths. People are, especially the senior population, they tend to think of assisted living or memory care is very institutional, like what their parents or grandparents went through. They don't understand the differences now. They don't understand the difference in payer sources. And there's programs and ways to fund it without going bankrupt. You don't have to work hard your entire life and then give all of your money to a nursing home. There's a lot of myths about behaviors and progression, and I would say, even though it's not a myth per se, family denial is really big and something I deal with a lot, but so many misconceptions. And I think not only the misconceptions, like you said, the misinformation that is given, I hear all the time from clients, well, so-and-so said this to me and, their recommendation and this. Everybody's situation is so unique in regards to care and finances and behaviors or what stage they're at in their disease progression. So it's important to really individualize their situation.
Something kind of going along with that. I'm kind of reminded, I myself have not had anybody that I know of in my family who's had dementia or Alzheimer's, but my husband, his grandfather did, and it was kind of a sad situation. His grandmother passed away, and his grandfather's Alzheimer's just got so much worse after that. And he would be asking them, where's my wife? Where's my wife? And they finally got to the point where they would just tell him, you know what, she's out. She'll be back later. Because by the time he had forgotten again that they had told him that, and they didn't want him to keep reliving the death of his wife over and over again. So in those kind of situations, how do you coach people to handle that?
You just hit the nail on the head. And I'm so sorry for everything that your family has gone through. And you did everything exactly right, as you know, because especially as somebody progresses in their disease, yes, I mean, their long-term memory, they can remember their childhood. They can remember, in fact, they revert a lot of times to being that age. So it's very, common for them to say, I have to go to work, or they think they're 12 years old again, things like that. But that short-term memory, or even like you said, asking to go home, where's my wife, things like that, rather than just as you said, Sarah, having them relive that over and over, it's best to enter their reality. And not that it's a lie, I guess it's a therapeutic lie, if you will, but really it's designed, of course, to help with the family and us as caregivers, but to give the best quality for that resident and that patient, because like you said, the trauma of them having to go through this over and over and over is horrible. So yes, entering their reality wherever they're at, we meet them at, redirect, like you said, say she's out at the store, or say, you know what, your wife, say her name was Mary, oh, Mary, she's at the store. Mary makes such a good, batch of chocolate chip cookies that you like, or, tell me about that, or let's make, sort of something they can really expound on that they would be able to recollect and talk about and identify with.
Well, you're kind of building to the person's strengths instead of focusing on their weaknesses. Right. Focus on what you can do instead of what you can't do. This is actually great advice for any couples out there. Just take dementia out of the equation. I teach couples that instead of focusing on he said, she said, this is not accurate, that is not accurate. Have a conversation about something you can have a conversation about. And I discovered in long-term care that it is such a hidden treasure trove of information. I often tell the story of a room that I walked into, actually thousands of rooms. I'll mention a couple, and some of this is just kind of sadly humorous or humorously sad, but I saw a fella in a wheelchair, and goodness did he have a sense of humor. He looked like he was about 7 feet tall when he was standing up. Of course, he was in a wheelchair. And after I introduced myself, I said, "Wow, you look like you're so tall. How tall are you?" And he said, "Right now, about 3.5 feet tall." Because he's in a wheelchair. I asked another guy, I said, "How are you doing today?" And he said, "How the hell do you think I'm doing? I'm in a nursing home."
No, bless his heart.
Honesty.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a sense of humor out there, and there are just volumes and volumes of books that are waiting to be written to use this knowledge that have been gained over millennia of lifetimes. And what do we do with these people? We just tuck them away and forget about them.
I know.
It's just such a tragedy. It's we talk about bias and prejudice in our nation. And let me tell you, no disrespect to any oppressed group, but let me just tell you, the most discriminated against and group that has the most biases against it are the elderly.
Yes,
and what should be so scary about that is everyone listening to this episode, if you're lucky, depends on how you want to look at it, will one day be elderly. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is in our own best interest to start valuing elderly people. You do not stop being a useful human being because you get gray hair, lose your teeth, or lose a few neurons or a lot of neurons. The you that is you is still there. And that's one of the biggest myths that I ran into is, number one, people have so many distorted thoughts about dementia, and they view it as a threat to them in some way, and therefore they experience a lot of fear. Now, you listeners that have listened to the Art Lab before, you hear what I just did there, is fear isn't made out of whole cloth. Fear is made out of the thoughts that you decide to think. So if you decide to think that dementia means this person's life is over, or goodness sakes, maybe you think dementia is contagious or something. If you sit and visit with someone with dementia, you're going to get dementia. Or since you can't understand it, you don't need to be around it. Or since you're afraid of it, you don't need to be around it. Well, you're causing that just by your own thought processes. And I tell you, and this is going to rattle some cages, and it'll be a bit of a curveball, but there's actually a whole mechanics to dementia. There is a rhyme and reason to I'm doing air quotes here, to the madness, that once you understand it, it really makes perfect sense. And there's a story that I'm going to tell in post-edit. Jenny won't get to hear it until it comes out in post-edit, that kind of explains the progression of dementia. And through this story, it'll help you understand how dementia really works. But it's almost like playing Columbo sometimes, kind of piecing together what people with dementia tell you. And what are some situations where you've educated family members to listen deeper to what their family members are saying?
Yes. And everything you've said was so spot on. Fear-based, a lot of it's fear-based. And thank you for saying they are the most oppressed, because I firmly believe that. And that's why I'm a huge advocate. It's interesting because again, going back to telling families to meet them where they're at, they may be expressing one thing to us because there's an unmet need, but it's not actually what they're saying. So it's like you said, piecing together what actually is going on. Somebody may be saying, I'm cold. I'm cold. It may be, getting to know somebody's behavior may mean they're hungry or they're bored, something completely different, but they just can't verbalize that at that stage. So yes, learning their behaviors, and I tell families, I'm like, pay attention to patterns, pay attention to, time of days, things are happening, if there's a, certain trigger that's causing things, if it's, they haven't slept, if they have, it's time to eat, if they're agitated for whatever trigger, again, pay attention. If for example, doctor's appointments, if you're taking them somewhere and they don't do well in the afternoons, do not schedule an afternoon appointment. You're not going to get the best version of them at that point. So really just sort of learning their patterns and learning what they mean when they say one thing they could mean something completely different. And that happens quite often.
This is an excerpt from Naomi Files' book, Validation Therapy. The Art Lab highly recommends it. Cree, Cree, Cree. What happened? I whispered to Mrs. True, bending very close. They threw him away. Make them give him back, Mimi, please. Mrs. True's voice held the same soft ring of long ago. Her blue eyes were clear. Her hands holding mine were strong. Who? I asked. Mrs. True, who did they take away from you? Creaky. She threw him in the wastebasket. Mrs. True pointed to the nurse. That's the nurse, Mrs. True, not your mother. Mrs. True shook her head, disappointed in me. She turned away, tuning me out to stare into space, moaning softly, Cree, Cree, Cree. I persisted. Mrs. True, did you have a stroke? I wondered about her recent memory. She stared at me speechless. Her lips formed words, but no sound. She sat limp, resigned, conforming her body to the restraint. She sighed, I'm dead. I argued, Mrs. True, you can't be dead. You're talking to me. Honey, you're hearing things, Mrs. True said sadly. Do you want to die, Mrs. True? I asked softly. Yes. Her answer was sharp and clear. Creaky and I are rubbish. Red rubber rubbish. Rub, rub, rub-a-dub-dub. Throw us in the trash can. Mrs. True's voice rose suddenly to a shriek, piercing the day room. She hurled the imaginary object across the floor. Shut up, lady! A hoarse male voice bounced back. Shut up, a chorus of voices bleated. Mrs. True started to cry, whispering between sobs, Poor Creaky. She tore your legs. Your white ear is so soft. Get me out of this chair. Help, help, Miss True screamed.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
No, but
No, you're absolutely right though. It's there's been so many different situations where I have to, walk families through things. And again, their loved one is at a different stage. So what's appropriate and what looks quote unquote normal for someone may look very different to somebody else. But really just meeting them where they're at, again, learning their patterns, learning what behaviors mean what. Again, like you, doctor, I could go on thousands of examples, but for instance, there was a lady in memory care, and by the way, memory care residents are my favorite, that kind of goes against what we're saying with, fear-based and people are afraid, but I absolutely love them. There's so much to learn from them. If we would just take the time and listen, which is something that I instill in my children, and I think everybody should do that. The history lessons alone are wonderful. But I had a lady in memory care, and she would become agitated around, in the afternoon, certain time of day, which is not uncommon with sundowning. And she would always, start talking about her daughter who had actually passed away as an infant. And that was, being brought up again daily. So, what she did is something that a lot of dementia residents do, especially as they revert back to being in their 20s. We had a baby doll for her, and that gave her a great sense of purpose to take care of this baby that she thought was hers. So incorporating purpose into their day, whether it's a gentleman that was a mechanic by trade and thinks he has to go to work, and he's agitated because it's time to go to work. Give him something to fiddle with. If he's in a community, let him follow the maintenance guy around or give them projects at home. It's really about giving them a sense of purpose.
There could be a whole movie that was made about this type of effect, and I'm going to explain that neurologically for our listeners so that they understand it. Imagine that you're in a movie and someone keeps hitting the rewind button, and then they hit the fast forward button, and then they hit the pause button. Well, you would be back in the movie at minute number 37 and a half, living out that part of the movie. Now, what does that mean about you? Well, I don't think it really means anything. It's kind of odd. It's a different type of existence. It's a different type of cognitive functioning. But I think we over pathologize with it instead of joining that person in their reality. We want to make them join us in our reality, but I have an example for that too for our listeners. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I will run 3 miles. Sometimes I run 3.2. Now, I can run my mile in about 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Y'all come over. I have a question. Can you keep up? Well, maybe some of you could outrun me. I'm not the fastest runner, but I do a 6 minute, 43 second mile. But some of you could not keep up. Therefore, what has to happen if we're going to run in tandem is I have to slow down. Or should I insist that you speed up? If you have a family member with if you have a family member with dementia, then if you're going to run in tandem, then you're going to have to slow down, because like you running with me, you don't have the ability to speed up. Therefore, to have a relationship, folks, let's slow down. Let's join them. The old thing and I love it that you call it memory care. I'm still stuck in the dementia care. We're really not caring for dementia. Okay. We're really caring for a person. We're really caring for their memory, and I love the memory care thing. But back in the when I got into the field in it was the mid '80s. It was called reality orientation, and here's how that would work. We would see, and I'm going to catastrophize here and be grandiose and dramatic to make a point, but I'm not pulling this out of thin air. We might have a lady in her 80s who had developed dementia, and she's wandering the hallway looking for her daughter. Now, hold on to your seatbelts, because here's what would happen. We would have a very well-meaning nurse or CNA, certified nursing assistant, who would say, Mrs. Jones, you don't have a daughter. She died in a house fire 50 years ago.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my God.
Expecting Mrs. Jones to do what?
No.
Oh, sweetheart, thank you so much. I had forgotten about that.
No.
That she's been dead for 50 years. What the crap am I doing? Now, that was well-meaning.
It's really new to the behaviors that ensued then.
Of course. Yeah. What do you think Mrs. Jones is going to respond with? Well, she's going to respond with grief and anxiety and sadness and depression. And one of the first things we did with designing and they were called DDCUs. I guess it'd be better to call them MCUs. I guess that stands for Marvel Cinematic Universe, or memory care units. But we call them DDCUs. And we would teach people to ask them questions. And this is back to just the general mechanics of being in a relationship. Yeah. Instead of making statements, ask better questions. Well, Mrs. Jones, tell me about your daughter. Where did you last see her? Exactly. What do you remember about her? What was the last conversation you guys had? Ask better questions. And guess what? You can do that with your kids, your spouse, your neighbor, clinicians listening to this. You want to be a better clinician? Listen up. Ask better questions. You want to be a better caretaker for someone struggling with an illness like dementia, Alzheimer's, Lewy body disease, frontal temporal lobe dementia? Ask better questions. Slow your speed so that you could live your life in tandem with theirs. And I'm a little bit on a personal note. Some of you know this, but Jenny and I, we just met. We've been communicating for, I guess it's been a few months. We've been planning on you being on the show. But when I was 4 years old, I watched my dad take my mother to the hospital to give birth to my younger sister. And that's the last time I saw my mother in the state I knew her as my mother, because a few hours later, a blood clot left her leg, went to her heart. Her heart stopped, I think, for 8 or 9 minutes. That's a really long time, by the way.
That is a really long time.
And it destroyed large parts of her brain. And I'll cut to the end of the point of my point, is that sadly, there wasn't enough information out there for my dad to benefit about what was really going on. Because when you would go see my mother, who persisted in that state for the next 4 decades of her life, and she passed away about 10 years ago, and she would make loud noises, and she would make rapid movements that looked like she was disturbed or agitated. And the doctors unknowingly would say, she knows nothing, she hears nothing, she perceives nothing. And they were all absolutely wrong. They just didn't have proper information back in the mid-60s about that. But what was my mother trying to do? She was trying to communicate.
Yes.
See, when a person with dementia is doing things that you think are odd, that may be scary to you, that may not be what you remember of them as your family member, that is them reaching out. Imagine that person as in a deep, dark well of themselves. And they can look way up and they can see the light. And they can see your figure and they're reaching out to you, but they just can't reach you. See, that's them reaching out to you. And instead of putting them in a room or a closet, listen deeper. You can listen fast or you can listen deep. This is an occasion where we need to listen deeper. Now, Jenny, what are some of the thoughts and distorted cognitions, the distorted beliefs that you find family members have that you work with?
Yeah, and that was a great analogy, by the way. And I'm so sorry for everything your family has been through. And unfortunately, we hear about it more and more, not just from years past, but even, today, because we're still experiencing this. And I would say a lot of what I see is exactly, what you're saying is not listening deep enough. They are trying to communicate with us. I think a big thing is overstimulation for a lot of residents. Again, to your point earlier, similar to how we would deal with children or even somebody, that is on the autism spectrum. We're very careful about overstimulation and having the right environment. We really need to do that with our seniors also that suffer from some sort of cognitive deficit. I always try to, this sort of goes to what you were saying too, but I always sort of try to think about what it must be like for them trying to communicate with us, which is why, as you stated, we need to slow down and meet them where they're at. It must be so frustrating. Can you imagine trying to get your point across or just trying to express that you see your loved one or you love them or you're glad that they're, and it comes out completely different. And then it's sort of just ignored and, they're medicated or they're just, like you said, put in a room somewhere. The other thing that I think kind of goes along with this, a lot of conversations I'm having with families, and I'd love your take on this too, is the masking of dementia that I see. That's sort of on the opposite end of what we're talking about, but I have to have this conversation a lot with my clients. They don't realize how well their loved ones are able to mask the dementia, especially if they are in their own environment, their own home, things that are familiar to them. But once they get out of that, environment, even for an hour or, with a different face, it's really when things start to come out. So again, talking about adapting to that.
This is our second excerpt for the episode today from Naomi Fowles' most excellent book, Validation Therapy. We highly recommend it. June 10, 1891, Dear Diary. My mother hasn't changed. She embarrassed me again today, just like she did in Miss Nelson's third grade classroom. Remember, diary? It was Tuesday, parent-teacher night. She was talking to Miss Nelson just before the bell rang. My mother pointed her finger at me while she was talking, making everybody look at me. I scrunched myself down and willed myself to vanish. She whispered in a very loud voice, Florence, can't let go of that ugly wooden rabbit. That's why she has no friends. She bent down close to Sally Quinn in the first row. Honey, would you be friends with someone who drags a wooden rabbit around wherever she goes? No, you wouldn't. Sally Quinn giggled. My mother was satisfied. The whole class giggled. My mother made her point and turned back to Miss Nelson. I'm worried about Florence. I don't want her lugging that creaky rabbit around all her life. My mother didn't even bother to whisper. She moved toward me until she towered over me, holding out her hand for Creaky. Creaky is mine, I said. I love Creaky so much that I stuttered. I held his string tighter, hiding him under my desk. Daddy had made him for my third birthday just before he left us for good. Creaky's white pointed ears were smooth as velvet. Touching them made me feel peaceful, almost as if Daddy were with me. Daddy tied the string around Creaky's neck so that I could pull him behind me. Creaky's joints made a wonderful crackling sound when I pulled. I always knew he was there. My mother grabbed Creaky so hard that his hind leg snapped off. She marched up front and threw Creaky in Miss Nelson's steel wastebasket. Creaky made a hollow sound as he hit the bottom. I ran up to save him. Miss Nelson took the wastebasket with Creaky away.
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to therapybites.podbean.com. Welcome to Social Media Smackdown. Tonight, the irresistible force meets the illogical object. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to reason!
Hey T-Ballers, Doc Heath here with another episode of Social Media Smackdown. This is in reference to a post on YouTube called Give Them a Warning Shot from one of the many so-called charisma sites. It seems that people all over, men, are in search of how to be a man, and these sites pop up as clickbait for those desperate to find meaning in masculinity. The post talks about a reporter and labels the reporter being passive-aggressive, and shame on the reporter for doing this with Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. Well, I'm only a real clinician, so don't mind me, but a few things to consider here. How would you know someone is being passive-aggressive? I guess that depends on your definition of passive-aggressive. There is no diagnosis of passive-aggressive, and as we teach our clinicians, labeling someone with any label, including passive-aggressive, is based on sabotaging cognitive distortions, one of which is called mind reading. Passive-aggressive is literally this: I'm going to make you pay for some wrongdoing that you've done on me, and you won't even see it coming. Sounds more like the Mandarin, doesn't it? That's passive-aggressive. Think about it. This reporter gets a once-in-a-lifetime shot to interview one of the world's megastars, and you think he's going to risk screwing it up on purpose by being passive-aggressive? What's the motivation? Let's go for a little law of parsimony here. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Likely, he's just trying to ask interesting questions and asked one that may be ill-considered. Actually, and this is only based on 38 years of clinical experience, the onus lies on the one who has seemingly more power in that situation. That's the onus on the megastar, not the reporter. And what could have been said was, hey, we're not here to talk about that. Let's talk about Ultron. We'll come back later and talk about this when we have more time. How about some grace and space over putting others in their place? How about a little more do unto others as you'd have them do unto you? How about treating others not based on how they treat you, but based on who you have decided to be? Listen, T-Ballers, giving grace and space will get you so much further in life and preserve far more relationships than labeling others and walking off in a huff. I bet Robert might do this one just a little bit differently if he had the chance. Didn't others have to put up with a lot of you-know-what from him doing his own recovery? And don't people have to put up a lot from all of us? What about more grace and space and less labeling? So give clickbait posts like this the old 1-2 punch. Doc Heath out.
What a slobber knocker! The winner by Psychological Smackdown, Doc Heath! No pronouns were harmed during the production of this podcast.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball T. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
Individual psychological concepts are very different animals from one another. And while they are often readily observable in the wild, the Therapy Bites Art Lab Zoo affords us a unique opportunity to study them in a safe and controlled environment. Welcome to the Therapy Bites Art Lab Creature Feature. Oh, good heavens!
Oh my goodness, I don't know about this. I don't know. I think Uncle George is unhappy with me, based on some of the things that he said at the get together. I don't know if he even likes me anymore. I thought he used to be my favorite uncle, but oh my goodness, I'm probably just overthinking this whole situation. I mean, is it really that complicated? But I think it's that complicated, but I'm really not sure. But hey, T-Ball team, welcome to this episode's Creature Feature. I am your host, Safari Sarah, and I'm calling in from this beautiful rainforest. And can any of you guess what creature I was just giving an example of? I'll give it a couple seconds. Cue the crickets. Anybody? It was the underthinking ant. Yes, now this creature, you will know him because he is a little red ant. He has a little blue telescope, and all he is focused on is one teeny tiny little part of a situation, or a person, or an object, or anything like that. He is not focused on all of the many, many things that go together with a conversation, or an experience, or a situation. He's only focused on one little thing. And he is also practicing other inaccurate things. He's practicing catastrophizing and mind reading and fortune telling. Oh my! All of those things. So when you get to thinking that, oh my goodness, I'm overthinking this situation, just remember, it's not possible for us to overthink something, but boy, can we underthink it. And when we're underthinking, we're ignoring important aspects of the situation. So when you find yourself doing that, practice some ARTs, some accurate, realistic thoughts. How likely is it that I know exactly what my uncle is thinking? Very, very unlikely. How likely is it that one difficult conversation is going to ruin a relationship? Very, very unlikely. So really, really think about those ARTs when you experience these situations. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode, T-Ballers. Catch you in the next Creature Feature. Bye!
Thank you for joining us for the Therapy Bites Art Lab Creature Feature.
Live the art life. Become a T-Ball Teammate Inner Circle supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/therapybites.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Yeah. And I'd love to speak to that. And let me give you guys a possibly surprising parallel to that. When I was at the VA doing some rotations, soldiers would hide that they had trauma, that they had symptoms of PTSD, that they were dealing with lots of difficult psychological things. But why would they do that? Well, they told me exactly why they did that. They would say, well, Doc, I heard that you guys would take my gun away, or that you would lock me up, or that you would hold it against me and bust my rank or refuse to promote me. Therefore, it really makes perfect sense that if you're going to punish somebody for revealing this stuff to you, they're just not going to reveal it to you. And it's not for nothing that people who begin to notice some cognitive slippage will try their best to hide it because, that presents itself as a danger to them, and they catastrophize it, and they have all sorts of distorted thoughts about it. But some of those thoughts aren't distorted at all.
No.
That they look around and they see, wow, when people start experiencing some of this memory slippage, task segmentation slippage, verbal, I'm pointing at my right temple where this cognitive skill lives. If you're left-handed, left side if you're right-handed. Verbal fluency, slippage, anomia. If you've ever had trouble nailing a word, oh, what's that thing? It's, oh, you know what it is. It's that thing. It's like this. It's you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Well, that's anomia, and that can be an early sign of dementia, or maybe you're just tired, or your blood sugar's low, or you didn't sleep well last night, or you're nervous, or sometimes it's just a cricket in the brain, and you can't hear the word you're trying to say. But it could be a early sign of dementia. But we'll hide that because we think we know what's going to happen. If I tell you, you're going to put me away. One of the saddest things that I heard my mother-in-law say to her husband, my father-in-law, when she had developed dementia, she said, "You're not going to put me away in one of those homes, are you?"
See?
And he said, "No, we're going to keep doing what we're doing now." And that's exactly what they did. With the help of a very wonderful superhero lady whose name is Doc Heath's wife, they went to extraordinary measures to do everything they could to help her live out a meaningful life until the end of her life.
Well, God bless them, because that is not an easy task. And I really do commend them. And you know, that is amazing. And I do think it's harder, you know, on men. It really is, when their wives start to decline, just because women historically we're the caregivers, right? We take care of everything. So when the roles are reversed, it is more challenging. But you're right. Everybody says that, you know, I don't want to leave my home. And I am not kidding you when I say in 25 years, almost every single family I've worked with has said, "Oh, my parents will not go willingly if they go to a community or a facility. They will go kicking and screaming." I'm happy to say that in all of these years, it's only gone bad one time, and that was because a resident was masking dementia a little bit more than, you know, even the clinicians picked up on. The transition happens, you know, a lot of times more smoothly. But the fact that you were able to honor wishes and do that and find good care, because that's a whole other problem right now, you know, post-pandemic, and we're coming into what will be called the silver tsunami in years to come with more and more care being needed. That's wonderful that you were able to do that.
And a lot of families out there are, but that's not always possible. And I think that's where Jenny and her group comes in. But I want to say to our audience, just because you start having symptoms of dementia does not mean that you need to go to long-term care.
Oh my gosh,
the term, and I don't mean for it to sound very complicated, but I think the whole approach and goal should be helping that person maintain the highest practicable level of functioning. And that's the key, guys. Yeah. Is highest practicable level of functioning. And you don't necessarily need long-term care to do that, but at some point you may need it. And finally, the conclusion of our story for today, part 3 of our experts from Naomi Files' book, Validation Therapy. I wrote it for younger generations who will become caregivers, the author says. We want our caregivers to understand us, not restrain us. If our controls have weakened, if we expose our sores, if our feelings as well as our bladder should become incontinent, we do not want to be tranquilized. We do not want to be labeled senile delinquents. If buried rage surfaces out of sequence in the final stage instead of in adolescence, we want empathy. We do not want to be tranquilized. We want empathy. Mrs. True controlled her feelings throughout her life. She buried her anger at her mother. Only after age 80 she lost physical controls. After she lost her husband, her home, her daughter, her clear vision, her recent memory, and her mobility, did she relive her painful memory. Over and over in the day room of the nursing home, she yelled at her mother. The nurse was a blur. Mrs. True's optic nerve was damaged, but she could focus clearly with her mind's eye. She used the nurse's shadowy form to restore her mother. She transformed the blurry figures in wheelchairs to children sitting behind desks in a third-grade classroom. Mrs. True had entered the resolution stage of life, her final task to clean the slate before she died. She returned to the past to resolve old hurts. 80-year-old Florence never shouted, "Mother, I died the day you threw Creaky in the wastebasket." This post was adapted from The Validation Breakthrough: Simple Techniques for Communicating with People with Alzheimer's and Other Dementias, 3rd edition by Naomi Fowle and Vicki DeClercq-Rubin, copyright 2012.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
I walked into many rooms in long-term care where the patient told me, hey, nobody put me here. I'm here because I decided this is where I need to be.
Wow. How great is that?
And I ran into some wonderful stories. I tell this story. One gentleman entered the long-term care facility with his wife, and they were in a side-by-side bed there, and she passed away. And I walked into his room, and I said, how are you? And he said, I'm sad. He said it just like that. You'd think he's angry. That's why you shouldn't try to read somebody's emotions. You get it wrong. I thought he was sad. Or I thought he was angry. He said he was sad. I took his word for it. But this guy served in World War II under General Patton.
Wow.
And that story's about General Patton, famously played by George C. Scott in the movie Patton. And there's thousands and thousands of stories like that. I'll tell you, this is a clean show, but I will tell you an edgy story, one of my favorites, where the couple was in the facility together, and they had a code word, and the code word was that lift. And the lift was a Hoyer lift, which is a mechanism used to help elevate a person out of a bed if they're too heavy for the staff to pick up. And the CNAs brought the couple some ice cream, and the old man said to the old lady, hey, in a little bit, why don't y'all bring that lift in here? Now, that meant we want to have sex.
I love that.
Yes, guys, you can have sex in a facility. It is not illegal, even though I've had nurses come to me and say, Doc, what do we do? They're wanting to have sex. Well, Bob, call the sex police. Don't come to me. There's a call 911, for heaven's sakes. We can't have these old people having sex. Heaven's sakes, what are you thinking? No, you can have sex in a nursing home. Goodness gracious.
That's a new one.
And the old man said, can you bring that lift in here? And the little old woman said, honey, I think I know what you're talking about. Tonight, I think I just want the ice cream.
Aww.
Now, how many husbands, what husbands out there haven't heard something similar? Yeah, I think I'll just have the ice cream.
Right.
I'm sure there's lots of couples will start using that from today forward. No, honey, I think I just have Docky's ice cream.
Exactly.
But life doesn't end because you enter a higher level of care. That could just be the beginning of a brand new adventure. We need to develop a culture where we stop catastrophizing getting the care that we need.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you. And I do preach this every day. I'm like, listen, this is not the end of your life, And in fact, if I look at, my clients on an individual basis, now, yes, even though I have a senior living placement company, not everybody's ready for that. So if that's the case and they're doing great in their homes, great. We're going to arm them with as many resources, as many ancillary services as we can to give them a productive, safe environment at home. But if they do need to move, I'm like, listen, in this case, you would be shocked. I tell my families, I'm like, even somebody that maybe was an introvert for many years, I'm not saying they're going to be the life of the party, but when they get into a place that they feel engaged, they feel they have purpose, they feel safe, they slowly start to become a different person almost, as opposed to, living in this big house at home and using 2 rooms. And what are they doing all day? They're watching TV. So it is a whole new chapter. And just like you said, the thousands of stories, I should write a book on that, or you should, because it is, some of my...
Hey, let's write it together. Give me a call. We'll write it together. But you make such a good point, because this soldier of General Patton, after his wife passed away, he grieved, and then he got back to living. and he engaged in games in the common room. They had face painting. They had dress up. Now, guys, listen, get over yourself. There's nothing demasculating about having fun. And he had fun until the day he passed away. And he lit up every room he entered into. He lit up so many lives. He's one of my favorite memories ever. Your life does not end. And Jenny, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because sometimes it is the elderly person being rescued from a life of darkness and seclusion into a place where they can have social connections. And they can make a difference by talking to people like, gosh, at the time I was just a snot-nosed 24-year-old brand new green out of the graduate school clinician. And people would look at me and say, how the heck old are you anyway? And what do you know? Well, they're right. I didn't know much. But the fantastic thing about that is I didn't have to know much. I just had to be present.
That's all they want. Just be present. Just listen. Just soak it in. And, I wonder if a lot of that resistance to thinking you can have a new chapter in life is guilt. If their spouse died especially, or, maybe they think they're not entitled, I guess, in a way. But I will tell you that this makes me think of my own grandfather, who has passed away since, but he was married to my grandmother for, probably 60 years or something. He moved into independent living. And in his early 90s, him and a woman there that he met got married. And I still hear stories in the industry today about, I'm not really sure what was going on, but some sneaky little things they were doing. And, they were still having fun, actually earlier. And I'm always I don't
sneaking out late at night into each other's rooms is what they were doing. Those naughty old people.
And this has been 20 years. And I still, people in the industry, one lady was actually a caregiver for him, even though she's progressed up the, corporate ladder and she does something different, but she still reminds me of it, So yes, you can have a whole new life, or you can just have the same life that you like now with better quality.
That's right. Right. And it's not a prison. Two more quick stories. No. I had the police call me when I was consulting, and the police said, "Hey, you've got to make," and I'll make up a name, "Mrs. Jones stop calling us." Oh, really? Mrs. Jones is calling you? Yeah, she's calling 911, and you got to stop it. And I said, hey, look, I'm not the police. You guys are, number one. Number two, it is not illegal to make a phone call to the police from a nursing home.
That's
right.
And
number three, if you think she's breaking the law, I know she's 87 and she has dementia, but come and arrest her. If you can get the prosecuting attorney to take that case, then knock yourself out. Mm-hmm. But that came from the local police department. Another fella, now I'm not recommending this. This is a terribly dangerous thing, but he disappeared. He would sit outside in his wheelchair, and one day he disappeared. We looked all over for him. We finally found him the next morning. He had decided to take himself to the liquor store down the road.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. And he and by the way, we'll take responsibility. It was our fault because some of the staff thought that once you're admitted to a nursing home, you got to kick the beer drinking habit. No beer here.
Way harder than we do, let me tell you.
So what was the cure for that? Well, we put in his MAR, medication administration record, 2 beers, QHS. That's every night, hour sleep, HS, hour sleep.
Absolutely.
And on the med cart, I don't remember what kind of beer it was. I don't want to give a beer ad on the air here. But it was 2 of his favorite kind of beer, hopefully light beer. And he got it every night on MedPass. Long-term care is not a prison or should be, but you listeners here, be aware of this. It really is a consumer beware kind of situation. Not all long-term care is created equally. There are regulations. That used to be my job. I would go around and make sure that facilities were following the regulations. And no surprise, a lot of them weren't. And I had more than one conversation with the owners of facilities. Look, you can do this two ways. You can stack up your bank account and provide substandard care. Or you can make a little bit less money and provide spectacular, out of this world care, and you'll be turning people away, and you'll be the talk of the town and the talk of the nation.
And that's what it comes down to. Do the right thing, and good will follow. And I love that you've seen the regulation side of it. And the other thing that's interesting to me, too, is, there are, for your listeners, too, there are differences in nursing home regulations and assisted living regulations. And then within those regulations, there's different sets of, rules and things they follow. But yes, do the right thing and the business will follow. And talking about consumer beware, that's something I spent a lot of time educating families on also, because my biggest thing is, just like you mentioned, the care. Senior living is a very, very competitive market. It's not like it was 20 years ago. There's one popping up on every corner now. And I always tell everybody, I'm like, listen, I keep my buildings accountable, and I really stay on top of them well after a resident moves in. Just because somebody has a pool, granite countertops, that's great. But I want to know about the tenure of your staff. I want to know exactly what your protocols are if there's a fall. I want to know how you work with your outside providers, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a great message that you mentioned about, consumer beware.
How do you advise clients as far as their own self-care when they're taking care of a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good topic. And I am constantly making videos on, TikTok or whatever about this, because caregiver burnout is so real. And I always find 99% of the time that if somebody is caring for their aging loved one, it's just them. They may have 4 siblings, but they're not picking up the heavy workload like, the one is. So self-care is so important. We don't even realize the toll it takes on us, both mentally, physically. It goes back to, what do you always hear on an airplane? If there's an emergency, put your oxygen mask on you first before you assist somebody else. Why? You're no good to anybody else if you're on the floor and can't breathe. It's the same thing. We have to take care of ourselves. I realize that's easier said than done, but we have to, whether it's a local support group, whether it's, taking time, sometimes just 10 minutes a day, walk outside, get some fresh air, run your 6-minute miles. If you're like, we can't do it, but the doc can. So
come on over. I'll get you at the car. I've got a training program
can.
for you guys. And that kind of plays in with the whole topic of guilt. And by the way, for you new to the art lab, let me just say, guilt is not a feeling. Guilt is a legal determination.
I love that.
Courts pronounce guilt, but how do courts do that? Courts do that based on evidence. If you think, and it is a thought, it is a cognition, if you think you're guilty of something, well, what is that? And what evidence is there to prove that you're guilty? When people talk about, quote, feeling guilt, we have a whole thing here about the F word in the art lab, and it is a 4-letter word, feel.
Yes.
What you're really talking about is disgust, self-directed disgust. But there's nothing you're guilty of because you're taking care of yourself.
That's right.
The best way to care for others is to make sure that you care first for yourself. If you want your vehicle to get you places, you have to care for it and maintain it. In caring for a loved one with dementia, you become the vehicle. And if you want to get them anywhere, you need to take care of yourself. Now, the thing about becoming an informed consumer, just a quick pro tip, you can look this up. There are regulations about long-term care. If your loved one is going into long-term care or is in long-term care, the more informed you are, the better care they will have. And to that end, you can Google, you can look up quality of life, long-term care, quality of life regulations. There's actually, we call them quality of life tags. Those are the specific regulations. And there's a whole list of them. And your loved one has a right to get those in long-term care. And on surveys, we would look at those in particular. It's not just about keeping people clean and bathed and medicated, sometimes over-medicated. That's a huge problem we don't have time for in the show. But it's mainly doing everything it takes to support their quality of life. Therefore, look that up, guys. Be an informed consumer.
Yes. Resident rights are huge, and they do have them. You're right.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for being with us. I could spend days talking about this. This is one of my favorite things ever. And I just want to say, in capping off the episode, life does not end when you develop a disability. And one of those disabilities can be a memory-based disability, but that's all it is. Memory changes. We get to a point where we don't store things as often, or we have trouble retrieving things. And I'd love to get into the neuroscience, but we're running out of time. But we have a couple more things to get from Jenny before we let her go. Jenny, what might be one of your favorite secret memory journey hacks?
T-ballers, time to quit your lollygagging. Get out of the dugout, onto the field, and live the art life.
One of my favorites. Let's see, there's so many. I think we kind of touched on it already, and it's not anything like earth-shattering, but it's the whole, meeting them where they're at, entering their reality, finding creative ways to redirect the conversation if there's something going on. Really, it's very simple, getting back to basics. If that's a hack, I guess, that's something I talk about a lot, but then there's other things too, like, as far as hacks, that people don't know about programs. There's little fidget blankets, memory care residents can use. So I could go on for hours and hours, but there's so many. It's anything that's going to bring the resident purpose for that particular situation. Let them sweep the floor. Let them hold a baby doll. That hack
that's so important. I've seen people enter long-term care and they'll walk in the front door, and then, mark my words, they lose the ability to walk within 30 days. Now, why is that? They lose that ability because they walk slowly, and sometimes nursing staff are too fast-paced. It's just quicker to get them down the hallway to plop their butt in a wheelchair. But it's really a use it or lose it proposition. Right. Therefore, the best thing you can do is stop trying to take over every aspect of that person's life. Let them do things. Who cares if they drop a dish or a fork or they don't do it perfectly? Let them do it. Let them do it. I raised my son that way. He told me one time, and this was a huge wake-up call, he asked me to do something, and I was in such a hurry. We were outside. It was dark. It was hot. The mosquitoes were biting. And he said to me this. He said, "Dad, I know you think I can't do things, but I really can. And if there's something that your aging parent or loved one wants to say to you, and listen up, guys, this is important, is I know you think I can no longer do things, but I really can."
That's right. And give them that ability to do it.
Right. We talked about the downward slope of dementia, dealing with guilt, the 36-hour day, rethinking burnout. There's actually a book called The 36-Hour Day. I'd really recommend it. It's all about self-care. We've touched on some neuroscience of dementia, best care practices for families. And we have one more thing, deep from the dark recesses of the therapy couch we've curated just for Jenny.
We journey now with Doc Heath as he submerges with our special guest into the depths beneath the dark recesses of the therapy couch.
All right.
Okay. Jenny, imagine that you yourself develop dementia and you have one last chance with a clear mind to instruct your family on 3 things and 3 things only to help them take this journey with you. What 3 things would you share with them to best take this journey with you at the end of your life?
Oh, I love this question. My family probably already knows what I would request or say, but I would say 3 things. Patience. They know I'm not easy to deal with sometimes, so just have patience with me. Make sure that they honor my wishes, everything that I've laid out for them with the wills and everything, that's why I spelled it out for them. And just take the time. If I'm repeating myself 100 times a day, or if I want to talk about, memories of when my children were born or things that are nonsensical to them, just go with it. Just pacify me and give me that moment.
That's so fantastic. That is so fantastic. I think I would say to my family, I may not hear so good. I may not see so good. I may not walk so good or remember so good, but I'm still here.
Yes. I'm present.
Still here. Folks, if you have a loved one with dementia, with some other type of neurological disorder, remember that they're still here. Thank you guys for joining us. Catch you on the next episode. Go out there and give somebody you love a big hug. And take care of them and take care of yourself. See you next time. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Guest analyst Dr. Jung A.R.T. reporting for Art Lab's psychomalagical couch duty for Dr. Freudnut, on sabbatical being psychovacationalized. Senior living specialist Jenny Kenderes PMS performance places her in the 98th percentile on the PMS's SLSS, Senior Living Superhero Scale. This indicates a prodigious propensity in Jenny's cortical crevices of perpetually promoting premium patient progress. Overall, Miss Kenderes' PMS's psychosilimetric assessment results present a picture of an individual superlatively centered on supercharging the lives of seniors. This superabundant soul likely has a splendiferous prognosis of superlative senior living support in the foreseeable future, until the uncontainable cognition crusading features of her psyche have been psychobiologically analyzed and exercised. It is my considered conclusion that Miss Jenny Kenderes be prescribed no less than 324 milligram IC intracognitive dose of Signor Azaline and a 2300 milligram IN intraneuronal dose of Kinder Ovir to curtail confabulating creaky cognitions. Dr. Jung A.R.T. guest Shrinkstigator, Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Grab some of this episode's guest merchandise, specially designed to help keep this episode's message top of mind in your life. Don't forget friends and family members who could use an Art Lab mental boost too. Just go to therapybites.myshopify.com.
Hey, T-Ballers, thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey, Therapy Bites Art Labbers, welcome to another episode of the T-Ball team. And I'm the team today, but I got some team members that are coming up on the show, Larry Brandon, the Smarticle Podcast. But what can we help you learn today? What's the problem we can help you solve? Well, do we have a drug for you? Abacal, the last miracle prescription drug you'll ever need. It cures insomnia, depression, anxiety, constipation, and even wee willy syndrome. But more on this miracle medicine at the end of today's show. Have you ever wondered why you see so many pharmaceutical names on notepads, pens, and posters in your doctor's office or therapist's office? Have you noticed the avalanche of mental health diagnoses? Do you want to hear the real story of research and what those fancy statistics really prove? Well, join us today as we go deep beneath the dark recesses of the therapy couch to take a bite out of some nefarious psychological research and shady science practices with our guest. Up next on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by... Someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking, thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke, anti-free speech, mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. Go ahead, don't be podgorophobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.